It is just about that time to introduce this morning's keynote, Dr. Gerry Ebalaroza-Tunnell. Gerry is an inspiring Indigenous leader who blends traditional practices of aloha with westernized knowledge to bring progress and harmony between communities. As CEO of CO3 Consulting, she uses principles such as love, compassion, and empathy to establish organizational balance. With her deep studies, a doctorate from the California Institute of Integral Studies, a master's degree from Antioch University focusing on whole system design, social science degree emphasizing sociology and anthropology at Washington State University, go Cougs, accreditation in the Institute of HeartMath's Resilience Advantage program, it's crystal clear why this inspirational woman leaves lasting change everywhere she goes. Welcome, Gerry.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And I won't hold you accountable to saying my name wrong. It's actually Gerry. So anyway, so aloha kakayaka, everyone, and good morning. And what an honor to be sharing space with all of you this morning and the opportunity to be your keynote for the 7th annual Step Up Moving Racial Equity Forward. So you all should have received a poll prompt when you entered the room. And the first one, it talks about my goal for attending Step Up this year is to gain knowledge that will improve the organization I work in and communities I live. And the second one is my goal for attending Step Up this year is to gain insight and skills for improving myself and inspiring personal growth. So I wanted to take the opportunity to take a look at the results. And from what I'm seeing, I don't know if we're able, let me see if I can share my screen here. Oops, hold on. So it says, looks like 83% says to gain skills and knowledge that will improve the organization I work and communities I live in. And about 50% of you says to gain insight and skills for improving myself and inspiring personal growth. So as you can see in these two statements, there is quite a difference. The first statement refers to work outside of yourself and beyond your influence, while the second concerns you and your direct persuasion for change. So thank you for those who participated in that. So as I get started, I'd like to say that humans like to talk about change, but often enough, we are slow to adopt it. We love discussing systems and how we would affect change within them, but we rarely talk about changing ourselves first. We call for change in social systems, but struggle to adapt in the face of it because changing system forces change upon us. So isn't it ironic that we look outside of ourselves for change when in reality, change begins and ends within each of us? The first thing I learned in my master's program for host systems design at Antioch University, Seattle, is that we change systems by changing people within the system because we are the system. We can only change systems if the hearts and minds of the people within the systems change first. So as an Indigenous storyteller, I'm devoted to using a tool that can bring complex stories alive. Storytelling is sacred in our cultures, and it strengthens relationships, sustains communities, and nourishes us spiritually through aloha. So sharing stories has an incredible power to transform minds through presence. When we engage with these stories, we gain insights and perspectives from entirely different points of views. I'm not able to control the slides, but I'm going to ask whoever to please put the slides down so that way I could, we're having issues with the slides. I'm not able to control it. Whoever's controlling the slides, could you please bring it down?
You want them to be pulled down or put to the
I
next?
want it, I want it to be pulled down because I'm not able to advance the slides.
Got it.
Thanks, Heather. So through storytelling, I seek to cultivate understanding, fostering collaboration, and promote unity by bringing people together to listen deeply and think systemically about their shared stories. And I hope the stories that I share with you this morning will inspire and nourish your mind, heart, and soul, and fill your day with aloha. So I was born and raised on the beautiful island of Oahu, Hawaii, to Roy and Gloria Ebalaroza. And I am the third of 6 children. And I was the typical middle child who constantly pushed boundaries and challenged the status quo whenever possible. If I asked questions that wasn't answered to my liking, I was the child that would continue to ask questions that would frustrate my parents and my grandparents. I would be the one that would be like, when my mom would say curiosity killed the cat, I would reply with, and exactly how did curiosity kill the cat? So at an early age, I developed a strong interest in wondering what existed beyond the reef of my island home. And I would sit on the shores for hours, staring across the water and completely lost in the curiosity of where would I end up if I swam beyond the line where the sky met the ocean. And I wanted to learn about different cultures and places. So I read books and watched shows that delivered the outside world to me. And my curiosity grew stronger as I got older, and I became increasingly interested in different cultures and places, especially when my cousins who I grew up with left the islands and moved to Fairbanks, Alaska. I remember them telling me stories of how it got so cold that they could throw a cup of hot water into the air and it would freeze before it touched the ground. And I was like, what? How is that even possible? When my relatives from New York City and Maryland and California would visit us on the island, I was so fascinated by how they dressed, how they spoke, and understood the world from a point of view that was so different than my own. So my desire to learn about the world beyond the reef of Hawaii became even greater. And I started wondering, what would it be like to get out there and experience these places for myself? So at 17, I was in a conversation with my father under the mango tree in our front yard. And I was telling him of my plans to leave the safety net of our island. And my dad, eating a mango sprinkled with salt and pepper, placed his mango down on a plate in front of us. And he looked at me and he said that the stories I heard from my relatives living on the mainland were only the good things they wanted to share. Dad said what they didn't share with me was the racism, the discrimination, and the disharmony they encountered in this world. And living in Hawaii, I knew very little of these concepts that he spoke of. So my father grabbed his salt shaker and he began to remove the top, and I knew a lesson was coming. And I was ready to listen. He spread the salt on the table before us and he said, "This is the world." He shook some pepper into his hand before gently placing a speck of pepper onto the bed of salt on the table, pointing firmly, "This is you." He continued, "Haole people," in the Hawaiian language. Haole means foreigner, but to my dad, he meant white people, would discriminate against you because of your brown skin. Still, despite their judgment, baby girl, never, never forget who you are and be proud of your culture and identity. I can do that. I know I can do that, Dad. I don't care what people think about me. Well, that was the attitude I had when I left my island home. So upon arriving to Los Angeles, California, which was my first destination, at 17 years old, I was quickly checked. I got a job at a fast food restaurant near Del Amo Mall in Torrance, California. And one afternoon, a few weeks into being a Californian, a woman came up to me to order. And I greeted her, and she rudely held her hand up. And I waited to take her order, and she started ordering in Spanish. And I told her, no español, no Spanish. She looked at me and rolled her eyes and said, if you're not Mexican, what are you? Because you're not Black, and you're definitely not white. This was the first time in my life that I had been referred to by my skin color. So her attitude changed when I told her that I was from Hawaii. She became excited, and with great enthusiasm, she said, oh my God, I love Hawaii. I own a condo on Maui. And I was like, whoa, this reaction from this woman absolutely confused me. What was that about? She treated me poorly when she thought I was Mexican. But as soon as I told her I was from Hawaii, I suddenly became acceptable to be treated with dignity? WTF. When my boys were little, my sons are now 35 and 36. When my boys were little, we went to Leavenworth with some military friends. My youngest son, who was 5 then, he needed to go potty. So we went into a sandwich shop, and I asked, hey, could we use your restroom? Right away, the gentleman looks at me and he says, no, this is for paying customers only. And so we were denied and sent away. I then watched my friend and her son leave the same sandwich shop, relieved because they were welcome to use the restroom without any purchase, while my son and I were denied the same dignity and opportunity. What was going on there? So a decade or more ago, I worked for an anti-bullying organization, and I was a sales manager for the West Coast, which included Hawaii. It was my first job upon completing my undergraduate. So one afternoon, I was on the phone with a potential client from Hawaii, and we spoke Hawaiian Pidgin English, our island language, blended with Olelo Hawaii and the numerous languages that came into the island due to labor shortages from the 18th to the 20th century. And it also became recognized as a US dialect in 2015. I just needed to say that. So after the call, my boss yelled at me to get into her office from across the room. And her tone was pretty sharp and accusatory. And I had been with the company for less than 90 days, and I was embarrassed for being called out in front of my new peers for some unknown reason. So when I sat in her office, and she began to yell at me, and the door was open, so everyone out in the office could hear this woman yelling at me. And she says, I don't know who you were talking to, but whatever ghetto language that was, it sounded like you couldn't hold a degree higher than junior college, much less a bachelor's. I had been working on my master's degree at Antioch University, Seattle in host systems design, and she knew that. So I was left with questioning myself on why do these events keep happening? And despite my naivete, I quickly discovered that racism was a pervasive problem. The harsh reality behind my father's warnings suddenly became clear. Even those who meant well inflicted an onslaught of microaggressions on me through predatory language and subtle bigotry. This insidious nature of prejudice left scars too deep for ignorance to erase. And in some cases, the intent to hurt could not even be overlooked. What I didn't learn from my father's lessons was the impact that I would endure because of racial prejudice and discrimination. My experiences with racism and bigotry were painful. And I didn't want to hurt anymore. I was tired of it, watching my friends succeed in life and being treated differently. So what I did unconsciously is I internalized the lies. I began to believe that who I was not good enough. And I pushed forward with my journey toward assimilation. I forgot what my father told me about never forgetting who I am and being proud of my people, of my culture, and my identity. I believed that the only way to success was to adopt the way of the dominant culture. I became a perfectionist and a disciple of constant progress. I worshiped at the altar of significance, success, and accumulation. I dug into quantity over quality, possession over partnership, and individualism over community. Chima Okun highlights these values of assimilation into the dominant culture in her work, The Characteristics of White Supremacy. And if you have the opportunity to check it out, I would highly recommend that you look into the characteristics of white supremacy. So in 2014, I went home for a class reunion. And I was proud of my accomplishments, my education and distinction, and I wasn't afraid to boast to my friends. As I reflect back on those moments, I remember on how I would look down on my people, and I would use my newly adopted academic language to symbolize my self-importance and my superiority over my own people. And I had become a pompous ass. Then one of my friends, who I see as a brother, he checked me and he said, "Hey sis, do you know that no one wants to talk to you when you come home?" And I was confused because I thought, why? I'm super cool. I'm smart. I asked him, why is this? And he said, because you forgot where you came from, sis. And he told me that no matter how many letters I put behind my name, they should never be used to disconnect us from our roots. He reminded me that the power of our heritage and our stories that was given to us from our kupuna, from our elders, should never be forgotten. He reminded me that without the strength and the wisdom of the generations before us, of our ancestors before us, that we could never have achieved what has been accomplished today. And that every breath taken is powered through the connection between our Lahui, our people, and the Aina, the land that birthed me into this world. And he was right. You know, deep down inside of my heart, I knew he was right. And I began to take my connection to my ancestry, my history, and my indigeneity seriously. So when I finished my master's program in host systems design at Antioch University, I left with the skills and tools to analyze and observe social systems. I understood the deep interconnectedness between my ancestry, my identity, my race, my culture, the power dynamics, and the privileges that I held. And with this newfound skill set, I dug deeper into the concept of race. And I found it fascinating on how racial identity has evolved over the centuries as a tool of oppression. And with the connection to the Aina and the connection back to my people, my Lahui, I realized that our identities are much more complex than skin color. You see, race is not biological, nor does it reside in our DNA. Race is not biological, nor does it reside in our DNA. Race is a paradigm created by Europeans and upheld by all humanity living under this paradigm. Race is a paradigm created by Europeans and upheld by all humanity living under this paradigm. I understood that a racialized identity is a construct designed to assign value and segregate based on phenotypical characteristics. Race is a pseudoscience developed during the European Enlightenment that underwent a massive legal evolution in the Virginia colonies of 1681 to give us the dynamics of white, black, brown, and persons of color that we recognize and identify with today. So upon this discovery, I devolved into a silent rage, and I was angry with myself because I knew that what I had done in denying my culture and my people, angry at white people for creating and upholding systems of oppression in our daily lives. I needed to learn more about these structures of racism that was implemented over 600 years ago. So I attended conferences like Leadership Snohomish County, Moving Racial Equity Forward like this, and I entered into the realm of diversity, equity, and inclusion with full force. And I found that it only served to fuel my fury with each attendance. With each step I took toward understanding race, my anger grew, and I brought that anger home. I began seeing my husband as the epitome of everything I wanted to dismantle in this country. He was the white, cisgendered, heterosexual, patriarchal colonizer. He and everyone who looked like him were the ones who had caused this problem, and they needed to fix it. The words I spewed from my mouth at home were sharp, it was foreign, and it was unkind. See, my husband had been holding space in our relationship for almost 6 years so that I could finish my degree. I labeled his actions from my perspective of his intent as patriarchal, as racist, or toxic masculinity. I began referring to him as a colonizer, a white man, and an oppressor. I decided to get a doctorate. And as I dug deep into my heritage and my own generational trauma, my husband was working on running a business he hated so that the bills could get paid. And during that time, neither of us was sure if we were going to make it. So after almost a year of the sudden but informed change in my paradigm and behavior, we were at a breaking point. My anger was an expression of the pain and drama that I was digging up. And while it had a place in my journey, under its current manifestation, it wasn't doing anyone any good. It wasn't doing me any good. I secretly believed that I was woke and deliberately made people of European descent ashamed of the color of their skin and blamed them for the racism in the society. And I thought this was the only way to end oppression, not realizing that what it did was perpetuating the further divisions. Growing up in Oahu, aloha is everything. It's woven into the fabric of our culture. Exploring aloha's origins and etymology in my dissertation was a relatively easy decision. But the journey of self-exploration that this led me on, that took work, and it was hard. The journey began with me trying to understand the colonization of Hawaii in connection to the global colonization that was taking place worldwide, hoping that it would bring me to understand my place in colonization. As I dug into my research, I thought that it would start with the history of Captain Cook's arrival on the islands in 1778. And I was wrong. In Hawaii, we celebrate the victory of King Kamehameha King Kamehameha I as he unified the islands of Hawaii. What we don't talk about is that he had the assistance of Western technology and the advice to do it. Captain Cook, as we all know, found the islands of Hawaii in 1778. And on February 14th of the following year, the captain was killed in a battle, actually beheaded on Kealakekua Bay on Hawaii, after trying to secure a new mast for his ship without gaining permission from the island's chiefs. So Cook's small fleet would regroup and leave Hawaii. When this event occurred with Cook and his men, Kamehameha was a young man and he was not in line to be chief. His ambition was sparked by what he saw in the tall ships of Cook's small fleet. After Kamehameha's uncle, the chief of Hawaii, died, Kamehameha challenged and killed his cousin to gain the throne of Hawaii Island. The interaction with European technology and weaponry impacted the young noble, but his resources didn't match his initiative. Europeans were not welcome in Hawaii during his uncle's rule, and his access to such warcraft was non-existent. It wasn't until 1790 that a young Englishman and a small group of sailors arrived with a stolen ship in a desperate escape from Spanish California. They arrived at the shores of Hawaii Island and were immediately set upon by warriors. All in the party were killed except for a man named Isaac Davis, who would become the war counsel to King Kamehameha. And in May of 1810, King Kamehameha unified the island nations of Hawaii with gunpowder, cannon, and 2 European advisors. A robust trade economy began during King Kamehameha's rule. He personally took possession of all of the koa groves. And the koa tree is a hard, beautiful wood that is now protected in Hawaii. So he took possession of all the koa groves throughout the islands and started the work of deforesting and trading with kingdoms of Asia. Fishing and whaling became commercialized endeavors. Foreign trade, religion, and educators were furnished to civilize the fledgling nation. Upon his death, Kamehameha's son would take the throne, and Kamehameha's wife would rule as Queen Mother. She immediately abolished kapu, the ancient Hawaiian code of conduct of laws and regulations. So King Kamehameha II would begin to fashion his kingdom in the likeness of the British monarchy. The new Hawaiian nation and its noble class thrived under this regime. Missionaries called for banning the hula and olelo Hawaii, our dance on how we would relate back to the gods and our language. The Hawaii kingdom moved from present-day Kona to Honolulu, Hawaii, and the king would die of disease on his voyage home from a diplomatic visit to England. So like many of the world's indigenous peoples, Western disease began taking hold in the native Hawaiian population. The numbers started to decline rapidly, and by 1800, 90% of the original inhabitants of Hawaii had died from flu, the pox, and the plague. By 1920, the US Census calculated the Hawaiian indigenous population at just over 24,000 people. This same story had played out repeatedly around the world wherever European colonization met indigenous populations. And this is where my Hawaiian story begins. Because of the decline of the indigenous Hawaiian population in the early 19th century, the nation of Hawaii had to bring in foreign labor. The first immigrants for the sugarcane and pineapple plantations thriving on the islands were the Japanese. Then came the Chinese. Then in 1890, the United States, with the backing of US business interests in the islands, forced Queen Liliuokalani at gunpoint to surrender her sovereignty under threat and annihilation. Forced our queen at gunpoint to surrender her sovereignty under threat of annihilation. In 1898, the same year, the US destroyed the Spanish Armada in Manila Bay and took over Filipino occupation. The US officially annexed the island nation of Hawaii. Filipino and Portuguese immigrants began pouring into the islands as plantations desperately needed labor to strengthen the growth of the new industrial economy. My grandfathers came to the islands from the Philippines to seek a better life for themselves. My grandfather, Perfecto Philomer from Cebu, worked in the sugarcane fields and met my grandmother, Natividad Moreno, who was born and raised on Makaweli, Kauai. They married and raised a family of 8 children, my grandmother Gloria being their firstborn. My paternal grandfather, Sergio Ebalaroza, came to Hawaii from Bohol, Philippines, also seeking a better life, and found himself working for the newly formed Hawaiian Electric. He met and married my grandmother, Mary de Coscos, who was born and raised in Makawao on the island of Maui. And they raised 6 children. My father, Oloheo, was her second-born son. So as I unraveled the mysteries of my family of origin in my research, I began to see my story within colonization. Our Hawaiian lineage had begun, and I am 5th generation Hawaiian, Filipino, Chinese, Portuguese, Spanish, and Polynesian ancestry. However, in my research, I found that my story of colonization went even further back. I learned of the Spanish colonization of the Philippines in 1521 when Magellan first arrived. I discovered the Treaty of Cebu signed by my ancestors in 1565. And this marked the beginning of a 370 rule over the Philippines by the Spaniards. During this time, the uprising was squashed, villages pillaged, and the atrocities transpired by the actual colonization. But the actual colonization came after the conquistadors. In the years after the Treaty of Cebu, an influx of Spanish and Portuguese migrants poured into the Philippines as Europeans sought out new lands around the globe to grow and prosper in this emerging new world. European life was cut into 3 classes: the nobles, the priests, and the peasants. And life as a peasant was brutal. In my studies, I connected with my ancestors and I heard the cries of their suffering. I became angry and frustrated over this new realization. Growing up in Hawaii, I had only known aloha. It was the way we connected back to the land and how the land connected all of us. It was a reciprocal relationship. But for the first time in my life, I saw dominion, war, rape, and murder in my ancestry at the hands of the colonizer. Dissertations take a lot of work. They challenge us to see the world not as we want to, but as it is. We are taught not to begin with the outcome in mind, but to build upon inquiry. We learn how to ask questions and take the journey of discovering even more profound questions. And I am continuously on that journey. During my research, a lot of unhealed trauma arose within me. The kind of trauma weaved into generations through families of origins and their struggles. The type of drama embedded in our epigenetic encoding. It is the kind of trauma that requires you to dig it out to cease its effects upon future generations. Whew. But I wasn't there yet. In my consulting practice and my home life, I brought bias and hurt into my facilitations and household. I kept seeing my husband as of European descent, as the colonizer in our house, while around us, the movement of race, equity, and inclusion began to take a renewed shape in our country. I was beginning to understand that hurt people hurt people. And now through my reflection, I also know that at that time, I didn't know how to let go of the hurt. My husband and I grew apart as I went through the doctoral dissertation, and I continued exploring colonization's origins. I couldn't stand his colonizer's presence, and he couldn't understand why had he become the enemy. We had little of anything significant to say to each other for a while, and we slept in separate beds for a time. My monthly intensives to San Francisco to attend my cohort, to attend a session with my cohort at the California Institute of Integral Studies, this week-long time away was a reprieve for both of us. And we found a breakthrough during one of these sessions with my cohort in the spring of 2016. I was sitting on top of a rock overlooking Rockaway Beach in Pacifica. And while admiring the natural beauty all around me and feeling my ancestors' presence, what seemed like magic began to unfold. Out of nowhere, a little red fox was sitting on an adjacent rock, perched just 15 feet away. And as if orchestrated by some higher being above, a California red hawk circled right overhead while a pod of dolphins glided through the water just offshore. And yes, I know, it sounds a little woo-woo, like some people would say, but I believe that we should be open to a little more woo in our lives. So in this significant spiritual experience, I understood that the relationship between my husband and I needed to be amended. And he must have been feeling the same thing too, because soon after the moment passed, he called. And this marked a new beginning for our hearts to come together. So after that long reconciliation conversation, I will always remember what he said. He told me that he had been thinking long and hard about his whiteness and his racial identity. He began to question what it meant to be white and the origins of whiteness in general. And these brought up more questions than answers. He was discovering that the veil of colonization has covered us all, and he called it living in the colonized mind. Then I said something to him that I never expected to say. I told him that I had spent so much time seeing the murder, the rape, and the colonized ancestors that I didn't consider my Spanish and my Portuguese ancestors coming to the Philippines for a new life. After the conquistadors and the priests, it came the farmers, the bakers, the cobbles, the carpenters, and ranchers. At that moment, I realized that I was a colonizer too. So that night at dinner, as the evening sky burned orange on the California coastline, a powerful surge of energy and ancestral presence filled me with inspiration. Uncontainable creativity took over as I grabbed my pen to inscribe this beautiful poem onto a napkin. And I called this poem, "The Blood of My Ancestors Runs Through My Veins." A possible fisherman of the Philippines, a Spanish flamenco dancer, a doctor of Chinese medicine, a Portuguese curandero, a healer, a Polynesian warrior, I do not know. Buried secrets of treasure never to be found, deciding factors of my identity limited to the roundness of my eyes and the hue of my skin. What are you? Who am I? Do I choose to narrow myself down to a single identity, expunging the rest of my bloodline that flows within my veins? I cannot. I must not. To embrace myself, I must embrace them all. They are me, and I am them. They were the colonized, and they were the colonizers. Therefore, I am the oppressor, and I am the oppressed. The blood of both runs through my veins. Does this mean that I may also be the murderer and the murdered? The raped and the rapist? I am embodied by their genetic ghosts. Their tales tether my soul in the presence. I am a healer and I am a warrior. I am them and they are me. I carry their hope for tomorrow and I am the bridge. I am the cultural healing. Later in the same year, in November of 2016, a passing of knowledge came in the voice of a babe. Moana came to the big screen, and me and every Pacific Islander and every Poly out there were ecstatic. Finally, representation of our people. Our grandson, who will be 14 years old in June, had just turned 7. He was excited because his Jima was excited and he loved movies. He asked me excitedly, "Jima, is Moana your people?" And I'm like, "Of course," I said, "Moana is my people." His curiosity kind of perked and he said, "Jima, if Moana is your people and I am your grandson, is Moana my people too?" And I'm like, "You're darn right, grandson. Moana is your people. Represent, be proud." My husband, the big Norwegian guy, is perusing through HBO and comes across Vikings and he says, "These are my people." Our grandson's ears perk up and he looks at his grandfather, eyes full of wonder. "Papa, if Vikings are your people, does it make Vikings my people?" I'm in the other room listening to this exchange and thinking loudly in my head, no, it does not. Our grandson was back at our place the following week and he seemed sad. And I inquired to see what was going on with him. I'm like, "What's up, grandson? What's going on? Why do you feel so sad?" He looks at me with his big brown eyes and he says, "Jima, if Moana is your people, that makes Moana my people, right?" And I'm like, "Yes, grandson." "And if the Vikings are Papa's people and I'm his grandson, then Vikings are my people too, right?" And I'm like, "Yes, grandson. So why are you asking me this?" And he turns to me and he says, "Because I hear you talk about people who look like Papa and not in a very nice way. So Jima, what part of me do you not love? So Jima, what part of me do you not love? A 7-year-old words had crushed me. My heart was overwhelmed with grief, breaking into a million pieces. And through this experience, I realized how powerful our words can be and how much damage we can cause if we use them carelessly. So this lesson from my grandson called me to explore the deeper meaning of aloha, the kind of deep love I grew up with on the island of Oahu, Hawaii. Aloha wasn't just hello and goodbye for my family and me. It was life itself, existing only in the present moment. A collective sense of connection runs deep through our island home. And those who visit Hawaii can feel it, taste it, and even breathe it. It's an authentic beingness with love at its core, proudly connected to the Aina, the Vai, and the Kanaka, the land, the water, and the people. And because of this interaction with my grandson, I yearned to gain insight into the sacred word that defined my existence. Alongside researching colonization's origins, I was determined to uncover the true spirit behind aloha. I wanted to understand the word aloha as my ancestors did. I needed to know aloha with all my being. So in my research, I found that the epistemology, the root meaning of aloha, had a much deeper meaning than just a greeting. The sacred word is actually found in 2 words, alo, which translates to forward-facing presence, and ha, which means the breath of life. Thus, the true meaning behind this reverent expression is an invitation to share our energy in the present moment, which is the only moment that truly exists. And through this experience, we open ourselves to personal growth through connection. I had come to understand that from the indigenous perspective, aloha means sharing our stories, the openness of our hearts to another person's story, and the power and healing that can be found genuinely hearing and listening to another. Aloha taught me that when we engage in deep listening and share our experiences, we exchange knowledge through collective dialogue and create a new understanding of being in the world. This is aloha, the exchange of ideas, the resolution of conflict, the changing of our perspectives, and the evolution of our collective nature. We breathe these words to each other. Breath is life. Life is sacred. So shouldn't our words be sacred too? I began to decolonize. I started taking a heart-focused and body-intelligent resistance to the forces of colonialism that perpetuated the subjugation and exploitation of my mind and my body. I began cultivating practices that helped me build self-reflection, self-awareness, and self-regulation skills. And my husband collaborated and co-created in this effort. I had to start from the point of internalized oppression, and he had to start from a place of internalized superiority. And we began to see the cloak of isms and identities we placed upon ourselves and wore around with pride or shame. And we discovered that they can be pulled back, examined, altered, and even left behind when they become more harmful than helpful. I found that when the time for us to change, to grow, Creator will make things so uncomfortable that we will eventually have no choice but to change. My journey as a scholar went beyond formalized Western learning to opening my heart to ancestral indigenous practices. I combined this indigenous wisdom with the westernized education and developed the guiding principles of aloha as a personal practice. I forged new paths towards self-awareness defined by native biologists, tribal healers, ancient astronomers, combined with modern social science. And these teachings have inspired an effective method of transformation in both body and spirit, and forged a path forward that is deeply rooted in the centuries past for this present moment. And it starts with A. A is to ask. Unlocking the power of asking questions can be an effective tool for turning roadblocks into opportunities. It's a bridge connecting those with opposing viewpoints and encourages creative solutions that may have been hidden or previously overlooked. L is to listen. The need for human connection is so strong. And when connection is created with presence, alo, it is one of the greatest gifts we can experience. Simply put, people need to be seen and heard. But to really understand this phenomena of being seen and heard, we must create platforms that create safety, confidentiality, and compassion. O is to observe the sensations in your body, the body language of others, and the energy flowing in between. The sensations, the emotions, and the somatic responses in our body are not just signals for us to react, but also signals for us to pause and contemplate. H is for heart, the work of a Jedi, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, or a Debbie, diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion, or any combination of social justice words is heart work. Our heart is the cornerstone of aloha, where love and understanding dwell. Heart is the guide to the entire process of engagement and place to return when we find ourselves disconnecting and not deeply listening. Without the guiding influence of the heart, we can easily fall prey to reactive emotions such as insecurity, anger, fear, blame, shame, guilt, and other energy draining reactions and behaviors. The final A in the guiding principles of aloha is for adaptability and acknowledge. It is vital to acknowledge that part of the work to create healthy and thriving communities is acknowledging the diverse nuance of race, nationality, ethnicity, gender, identity, sexual orientation, age, religion, and many other aspects that make up cultured human beings. Even more important than this is the constant work of shedding these identities that we each layer upon ourselves and connect to our shared humanity. Within the nuance of being, we must learn to adapt to the complexity of our socialization and the socialization of others, and ensure we genuinely do no harm. Steeped in ancient traditions, aloha remains deeply intertwined with the spirit of Hawaii. Its power radiates from our ancestors who spoke these words to today's modern world, connecting us like unbroken chain of profound reverence and respect for the place of my island home, Hawaii. Reflecting on the healing of storytelling, I have been gifted with the opportunity to be an active part of a monumental project. It has been my honor to collaborate as part of the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. So for over 150 years, hundreds of thousands of Native children were taken or coerced away from their families and tribes and forced to attend government and religious-run Indian boarding schools. These tools were tools of colonization, assimilation, and genocide, resulting in the loss of land, language, culture, and traditional foods, and the permanent separation of children from their families. This week, I've had the honor to sit with elders from multiple tribal nations to capture their experiences, survivors and descendants of these boarding schools. And the pain from their words continues to reverberate in my heart, and it will for a long time to come. And despite the deep anger seething due to persistent injustice and maltreatment of Indigenous people and the oppressive systems put into place to silence voices, I am determined not to be consumed by my rage. However, to ensure that my sense of anger does not turn into something more toxic and destructive, I must learn to channel it through aloha, self-reflection, and awareness for providing the fuel for righteous action that seek justice with grace. And I call this gracious anger. I hope my stories this morning acted as a catalyst for self-reflection and appreciation. As you go about your day, be sure to speak with intention, not just words that reflect upon others in kindness, but also ones of treasured towards yourself as well. Remember, the conversation enveloping within is much more powerful than we can imagine. It has an incredible ability to hurt and heal simultaneously. Helping others to heal allows us to heal ourselves, which leads to healing the collective. And healing the collective leads to healing our nation. It is reciprocal, and we must heal together. A'ohe hana nui, he hana pu'ia no ke aloha. No task is too great when done together with love. With all my aloha to all of you, mahalo for having me here today.